Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. And we are back. I know that we usually do our live chat on Wednesdays, but we were both busy, so that's why we have moved it a day later. And throughout the next few weeks, I think we are going to be a little bit on and off because it's still summer times, and I have a little young family that I need to kind of had to satisfy their curiosity somehow, keep them occupied with something rather than facing the tablet screen all day. So I have to take them out
All
somewhere.
through the
So
school, yeah.
absolutely. So there may be a week or two that I won't be around, and but we will discuss that later. You're going to see my post
Yeah.
in the community page if we decided to cancel one or two chats. But today is going to be interesting because we're all going to talk about Canon. Being an ex-Canon user myself, I have a few things to say. And also, we have timed it quite nice because they just announced two new cameras, right, Rod?
Indeed, indeed. And I'm still absorbing the implications of these cameras and what they mean within the Canon
Yeah,
range. But
yeah.
I think you've had a close look at the specifications and you've got some thoughts of your own. So I think this could be quite an interesting conversation.
Absolutely. I mean, and just to give you a little bit of background, I mean, I have always been a Canon shooter up until I would say 2015, and that's when I starting to kind of slowly exploring options outside of the Canon cam. So I have been quite dedicated with Canon for many years. I started with the film cameras, film SLRs, and then moved on to digital DSLRs, and I think one of the reasons why I wouldn't say jumped the boat, but I kind of moved on to other system is because they were fairly slow in adapting mirrorless technologies right at the beginning, right? You know, when everybody was kind of like really rushing in, especially Sony was really pushing, Canon was quite slow. I mean, same as Nikon, I would say. You know, both of them were kind of slow in adapting the mirrorless space, and they still think their DSLRs were their bread and butter. You know, all the pro users of them. You know, like they don't see the urge of moving on. But then all of a sudden, when Sony's starting to overtaking in sales and in many regions, and they're starting to think, okay, maybe we were wrong. Maybe things has moved on a little bit, and they also see a lot of technologies can be pushed forward because, like for instance, electronic shutter and there's so much you can do with mechanical shutters. How fast can you do with the mechanical shutter? I think that's one main thing about, especially from Canon's point of view. A lot of their professionals are sports shooters, and a lot of them require fast, shooting speeds. The DSLR can only achieve, 12, 15 frames per second, like kind of at best.
That's a fast one, yeah.
Yeah, and like nowadays, you look at all the electronic mirrorless cameras; they shoot way faster than that. Especially when you employ digital electronic shutter in silent mode, you can go like really crazy. And this is something that the brand new R1 is quite spectacular when it comes to number. So it's interesting that now Canon has kind of really moving forward now, and just to stop talking about mirrors, just a little bit general chat there. How many of you have used Canon DSLRs before? I'd like to hear from you and your experience with them. And how many of you are using any sort of RF system right now? That will be quite interesting to compare as well. But just one quick question to Rod is that, do you think Canon really have 100% moved on now? Like they're not going to develop or release another DSLR? You think they're going to be 100% RF now?
Yeah, I think so. I think
Yep.
you have to assume. I think I was quite surprised to see the EOS 90D. I think that was the last one.
Yeah.
I'm afraid. But I think so. But I don't think it's exactly caught up with the others. In one respect, particularly, and that is IBIS. You have to go as far as the EOS R6 Mark II to
Yep.
get IBIS, and that's not a cheap camera. But all of Canon's full frame mirrorless rivals, IBIS
Yeah.
is standard.
Yep.
There's another subtler difference with Canon. It doesn't affect everyone, but as far as I can tell, Canon does not embed correction profiles in its raw files in the
Right.
same way that other makers do. So if you use Capture One, for example, which doesn't always come up with lens correction profiles for consumer Canon lenses, you can find yourself without a profile for your raw files, which it's a kind of minority instance, but it's just irritates me that you don't have manufacturer profiles embedded in the raw files.
Yeah.
Not a problem in Lightroom because Adobe's very quick to come up with its own, but it's just a thing.
Yeah.
But I think IBIS is the thing for me. That has surely that has to be in every camera now. You would think.
But do you think that will be the deciding factor, for many enthusiasts? Because people who spending that sort of money on a full frame cameras are usually the one who are more dedicated, who are already experienced in photography. They probably wouldn't settle for the lower end models anyway.
I'm not too sure. So I think if anything, beginners need in-body stabilization more than professionals. Professionals know what they're doing. They know how to handle shutter speed, ISO. They'll use tripods or monopods as required, and they'll typically have faster lenses. So I think in a funny kind of way, it's almost in the beginner market that IBIS is needed most. And I think I'm going to talk about prices in UK pounds, but I think the pound to dollar prices are very similar. And in fact, very often the dollar price is a little lower. So I'm going to say that the EOS R6 Mark II, the cheapest Canon RF camera with IBIS, is still £2,000 or $2,000, where other makers have cheaper full-frame mirrorless cameras that have IBIS and cost a lot less. So I think there's some catching up there.
Speaking of price, I'm not entirely sure. For those who are in the UK, at least, and the Amazon Prime had a deal for the last 2 days on the Canon. I think it was the RP, the lowest full frame camera.
Oh yeah.
It was. They had a deal for $699, and that
is incredible.
That is incredible for a full frame camera. Regardless what spec it is, a full frame digital camera. If you don't mind certain features being omitted, and like what you said there, IBIS and things like that, it's still a 24 megapixel full frame sensor. It may not have the best noise performance, no. But it is a cheap camera for full frame, and
it is. It's not that bad. I think even with the limitations of that sensor, it was not bad value when it's like 1,000 or a little bit more with the kit lens. But at that price, it's just a steal. It's the kind of camera you move on from, but you get a lot of camera for your money. I eventually swapped mine out for the EOS R8, which I find is a very interesting camera because it doesn't have IBIS, which I think is pretty poor in this day and age, but the AF and video features are from a more expensive camera. It's basically an EOS R6 II without the IBIS and a kind of EOS RP body. So in one sense, it's missing something it ought to have, but in another, it's an extremely powerful camera in that price range. So I don't know. I still think Canon needs to sort out the IBIS thing, but it's not a million miles behind.
Yeah, that's definitely one thing. But I think in my eyes, from being a Canon shooter, is one of the downs, or one thing that I always envy other brands back in the early digital age from Canon was the poor performances in the noise shadows. The shadow noise is extremely poor. It's always turned out very mushy, and
it is dreadful.
It was horrible. No matter how you're trying to process them, it's always bad. That was one thing, especially that when I used to use the DSLR Canons to shoot weddings, and quite often I have to shoot very dim environments. I have to be very, very very, very careful in exposing my shots, because I know for a fact that if I just underexpose just a little bit too much, all the shadow details are going to be crushed completely. And there's no way to rescue them at all, because when you bring up this shadow, all you see is blotches of noise and everything.
I know it's unusable. It's unusable. I think the R8 is a lot better than the RP ever was, and I think that's the same sensor as the 6D Mark II.
Right.
And I think this has been a problem all along for Canon, because Canon makes its own sensors, and I guess Canon thinks we don't need shadow detail. but anyway, but no, the R8 is a lot better. I'm still not convinced that the sensor in the R8 is quite as good as the sensors in rival cameras. I think I'd put Nikon and Sony ahead, possibly Panasonic. So I think from my point of view, Canon sensors have now reached a point where they're decent and competitive.
Yeah, well, it's certainly very interesting because obviously it's still early days for the new cameras from Canon to be analyzed in terms of their sensor performances and things. So we're gonna have to wait for a little bit before we can see like some numbers. But obviously, we as a photographers, we never really care numbers too much. All we really care about is how good you can create the images, right? There's one stop, half a stop dynamic range here and there is not going to make a huge difference as long as you know how to shoot or learn about the system that you're shooting with. That's the key about your photography, because at the end of the day, you can say that this camera is better than the other, but they're all tailored for certain kind of niche in a way. So there's no better solutions. You can find the best solution for yourself as a photographer. So let's. I can see some comments already. Some of you already mentioned that you have some Canon cameras. And D-Diver, I'm just going to bring up your comment here, and just would like to hear from you your reasoning, because it's kind of quite interesting. I've been a long time Ollie fanboy, not going to lie, and I'm thinking of getting my first Canon. But why are their bodies so damn heavy? It's full frame, full stop.
It depends on the body as well. I mean, the R6 Mark II is fairly substantial. The R8 it's light as a feather. Well, not as a feather, but it is a bit plasticky, but it's light. So it's perhaps not just the bodies, the lenses being full frame are always going to be heavy. But I think I'm actually in the middle of an opinion piece on this very thing. I've ended up spending a lot of my time with the Canon system when I don't particularly like Canon cameras, but I've arrived at it because of the lenses. Because I think somebody else has commented that the Nikon range, the Nikon Z5 and other full frame Nikons, they're nice cameras, but the lenses have been quite big, and especially the f1.8 primes, they do seem bigger than you would hope. Whereas the Canon f1.8 primes, they're not that big. They're not that expensive, and they're all right. So the lenses drew me towards Canon. And one I don't want to go too far off topic. One thing I found interesting is you've got lenses like the 24 to 105 f4 to 7.1 STM. You would look at it on paper and you think that has got to be rubbish. Actually, it's not. It's actually rather good. So I think what Canon, surprisingly, has got rather good at is making lenses which have quite modest specs, but perform very well within that envelope, so to speak. So the Canon 24 to 105, you can shoot at 105 millimeters, and your images look as sharp as they do at any other focal length. Whereas most 24 to 105s I've used, they drop off. So I think the lenses are interesting, especially the consumer ones.
Okay. Right, that's certainly interesting. We're going to come back to Canon lenses in just a moment. And I'm just also looking at another comment from Mark. And the Nikon Z5 is an absolute bargain. I regret selling it. My issue with Nikon is they make great cameras, but the lenses, like you said, are so large. The 50-85 1.8 image quality is incredible. And it is true. I mean, when I got my Nikon ZF, and I was looking at some Nikon lenses, but all I see is, like, just looking at the dimensions, they are just massive. They're very long lenses. They're not short. I'm not looking at like 1.4, 1.2, these high-end S lenses. I'm just looking at a more lower end one. I just want to have something that's aesthetically matching the form factor of the ZF, because you don't want to have a huge lens attached to the camera. Kind of look horrible in a way. And And so I want something slightly more compact. So the only lenses they have was the 40mm f2 or the 28 f2.8. Those are the only kind of compact lenses that they have, and all the others are just huge. And
that I always thought that the Nikon Z mount was designed to make all sorts of exotic lenses possible, but it just seems to have made them bigger. How did that happen?
but then like what Mark said, you know, even their 1.8 lenses are incredibly sharp. You know, that's something that we can say. But then again, you know, given the size, any lens maker can probably make something really, really sharp just because they have room to play with optically. They don't have to utilize, you know, a lot of space-saving elements and things like that.
I'm quite sure the Nikon 50mm is better, but the Canon 50mm is certainly smaller. And even the Nikon 35 1.8, that's quite a long lens. It's a fantastic lens. But why is it like 50% longer than the Canon one? I don't really understand. So, but yeah, that is just a slightly disappointing thing about full frame mirrorless, that we all thought short flange distance, radically different design, no need for retro focus designs because there's no mirror. Our lenses are going to be tiny and fantastic. Well, they're fantastic, but they're not tiny. So there we go.
Absolutely. And finally, I got Chuck here, and I had a 50D from 2009 to 2020. Wow, you shot it for quite long. And until I upgraded to A7 IV. And I would like to hear from you about your experience jumping from Canon to Sony, you know, in terms of shooting experience, because I know I have played around with Sony cameras for a while, and I could never get used to the interface or the speed, which I'm going to come to that in a separate chat, because we're going to talk about Sony at some point as well. And I'm going to come back to that. But yeah, we'd like to hear from you your experience about Canon versus Sony, and that will be quite interesting. So let's get some big elephant out of the way about yesterday's announcement from Canon. To me, I think the most interesting thing to me wasn't about the spec. Well, it is kind of in the spec, but it wasn't about the numbers. For instance, the shooting speed, the ISO range, the dynamic range, or back, you know, whatever. The thing that interests me the most is that Canon finally adopted AI outside of the focusing aids. So that's interesting. So there are two things there. First of all is the in-camera upscaling, and that's interesting. You know, that is essentially basically what Topaz is doing, and so I don't know how effective it is. You know, no one has kind of done an in-depth analysis on that particular aspect. Also, another thing is in-camera AI noise reduction. So that's certainly gonna put some worry to the likes of DxO and Topaz again.
I guess so. But then two questions immediately spring to mind for me. So in-camera upscaling, that is generating a JPEG, isn't it? You're not getting an upscaled RAW file.
I'm not entirely sure just yet, and I need to read up a little bit more. But either way, it is interesting because if you look at upscaling in general, anyway, if you like Topaz, you know, you take the raw file, but upscaling and the output is going to be JPEG or TIFF anyway. So you're not getting a raw file. So essentially, they're doing the job in camera for you before you even do anything to it.
So it's not like Adobe Enhance, which gives you a processed DNG. You wouldn't get money to fit on a memory card either. It's interesting, but it just makes me wonder, why would you need in-camera upscaling anyway? If 24 megapixels isn't enough, that doesn't sound to me like an everyday requirement.
Well, for the R5 Mark II, because it's got a 45 megapixels sensor, so it's quite high already. So even if you crop in, you're still you still got a decent amount of pixels to play with. But for the R1, it's only 24 megapixels. So if you crop in, let's say halfway, you only got 12 megapixels. But then again, I know it's kind of sounds a little bit silly for me to say that, but 12 megapixels is definitely more than enough to print on newspaper and magazines anyway in any given day and age. So you don't really need more than that. And to be quite honest, if you're really looking for ultimate quality, I don't think you should rely on upscaling either. So
I mean, if it's something you do with the snap of your fingers and it solves that kind of problem where you're shooting something that's you have to crop either because it's too small or it's the composition's way off, it's towards the edge of the frame. Now that you put it that way, I can see the advantages to being able to upscale a crop. But I'm still not entirely convinced. I mean, I suppose let's imagine you're doing some bird photography, and you've got a golden eagle perfectly mid-flight with the lighting just right, but it's in the left half of the frame. You're going to want to crop that, and if you can then resize it back up to 24 megapixels in camera by pressing a button, that could be useful. But I can't see wanting to take a full size 24 megapixel and push it up to 48 or whatever. That sounds a bit. So I can see the advantage for crops.
I think so, and Cal made an absolute comment here, gold comment here for me at least, is that because the in-camera crop is going to be outputting JPEG, and that means you're not going to be able to edit the photos before it's being upscaled, and so I think for those who are like to massage their file to your liking, you probably still want to use the raw, process them, like however you like it, color grade them, and then you can use Topaz or other upscaling software to bring up the resolution if you really want to. But I guess these sort of features are mainly used for journalists, perhaps. People who need fast.
If you're going to be shooting the Olympics in Paris, then you're not going to want to wait till you go back to your hotel and start fiddling around with raw files.
No, they need now.
You need to get it back straight away. Yeah.
And so the next feature is obviously the noise reduction. I think that's interesting. It's simply because we have been talking about, especially within the Michael Four Third community that you're fond with, and we've been talking about computational stuff for many years, and ever since DxO launched PO Raw technologies, and everyone said, "Oh, what if one day they have that in camera?" And that one day seems to have arrived yesterday. And Canon is the first company to announce using AI noise reduction in camera. So if they started it, and I'm pretty certain Sony, Nikon, and the rest is going to somehow trying to catch up and do their own version or whatnot to do something about. I think in particular Michael Four Third, both Lumix and OM System will have to have a look at that, simply because generally the noise performance isn't the best in a smaller format cameras, and it will be a huge benefit to the smaller crop factors cameras to be able to have some noise reduction in camera.
How long will it be before AI noise reduction becomes the default? But I guess with the EOS R1, it's going to depend on how good it is and how quick it is. But honestly, you've got a 24 megapixel full frame sensor. What the hell kind of ISOs do you think you're going to be shooting at that you'll need AI noise reduction? So I don't know.
Yep. Well, we shall see, because on the spec it has multiple processors in the actual in the camera. So it has the Digit 10, the Digit X processor, but it also had what they call the Digit Accelerator. I suppose that's the neural engines for doing all the AI work. So it has a dedicated processor just to do that sort of computational work. So no one knows how powerful it is, and I guess only time will tell, and when people start using those features we'll be able to tell exactly how effective they are and how quickly they can do things, or in fact how much it will impact on the battery life, because when you start running a lot of AI stuff, essentially it's going to eat up the battery life, and so it will be interesting to see how it all works together, whether it's going to behave like a normal camera. Once you're shooting, there's not going to be no buffering issues, and if you, let's say, doing a burst of high ISO images, then you all of them you want them to be AI noise reduction reduced, and it's going to be quite a lot of photo to be processed, simply because ours shooting at a lightning speed. You're going to end up with hundreds and hundreds of photos all being processed at the same time. So it's going to be interesting.
just going off the slight tangent, where does this leave the R3?
Interesting, because the R1 also have eye control, so essentially it's the R3, just with a slightly bigger buffer, bigger this and bigger that, but
It's yeah, because the R3's got unless I'm mistaken, a 24 megapixel stacked sensor.
Yep.
And it's not a whole lot cheaper. If I was selling Canon gear to professionals, I'd have to do a lot of homework to explain to them why Canon makes both and what the practical differences are. But yeah,
Well,
I'd like to know. See, the R3's not cheap,
well,
and the R3
funny enough,
seems to have been designed to do exactly. Funny
enough, you mentioned that, because back in the film SLR days, I don't know if you guys are old enough to remember the old EOS 1 series of professional cameras, the SLR. I'm not talking about DSLR, but they also had the EOS 3. The price between the two weren't exactly that much either. So like, if you look at that, they had that scenarios before where there's when EOS 3, then EOS 1, they're kind of competing each other. But there was significant difference between the two back in the film days. The EOS 1 was a full magnesium body tank, a camera like built to withstand like a nuclear bomb. The EOS 3, which I also have, is a plastic body. It's a polycarbonate body with magnesium shell. So spec-wise, straight away, there's a body difference there. One is obviously built for withstand knocks and bumps. One isn't. They're both weather sealed. Speed is probably the EOS 1 still slightly faster than the EOS 3, but you both can take the same battery grips and also motor drive. So essentially, you only talk about one frame difference in speed, film wise. So it's not significantly different. And you remember those days, SLR were quite simple. Not nowadays. We have so many features. So you talk about AF speed, you talk about AF points, how many they are. So the difference really were that. Obviously, the EOS 3 also had eye control back in the day. So the first eye control cameras, and the EOS 1, funny enough, hasn't got any IAF, but it does have a faster AF and also more AF points to cover the entire field finder. So there were the differences. But like you said, now the R3 and the R1 is almost identical, and minor few numbers differences in terms of buffer sizes, how much continues, and obviously all the new AI stuff, the noise reduction and the upscaling weren't available for R3. But how many of them will utilize that? That's another thing. But there's another thing that I really kind of caught my eyes as well. Apparently, it's got one of the biggest, highest resolution EVF on the R1 as well, which sports over 9 million dots, and it's a 0.9 times magnification. So that is a massive big screen in front of you.
That could be not dissimilar to the A9 III though. That's 9 million dot EVF, I think.
Yeah, I think. Let me just look at this spec. I think it's 9 point.
The thing though, I do feel in any comparison between the EOS R1 and the Sony A9 III, is the physical form factor. So the R1 is designed solely for that job. It's got the integrated grip design. It's built for big lenses, sports, action, wildlife. It feels to me like the A9 III is just built like every other Sony, and you just have to stick other bits on like a grip. If you want that same handling experience. So kind of different tack on that market, I think. But anyway, I think the R1 will just monster the whole industry in that particular genre, sports, action.
I think this is what is kind of designed for, just similar to all the 1 series Canon cameras before that. They're all tailored for sports. That's why I have a lower megapixel count, because they want speed. That's the essence of it. It's
and
not about
fast
resolution
speed too.
Absolutely. The R5. Let's talk a little bit about R5 Mark II. And we all know about the first R5 when it first came out, because it was the first kind of consumer level cameras to support an 8K video recording capabilities. But it turned out to be quite a quite a hot topic, literally, because it was overheating left, and as soon as people start testing it, and so it was a little bit of a embarrassing moment for Canon. So they're trying to do a lot more firmware updates and eventually introduce a fan and all sorts of stuff.
Honestly, that I think Canon being first caught all the flack for that.
Yep.
And it turns out any camera with that kind of form factor that shoots 8K has overheating issues. It's just that Canon caught all the incoming fire first.
Yeah.
It's an issue for all of them, I think. And besides, I think these days Canon would say buy the R5C, wouldn't they? Is that still a thing?
Yes.
The R5C?
Yes, kind of like the Cine version. It's like a Cine version. Yes, it has got built-in fan, that one, yes.
Yeah. So they'll just say,
it's a thicker body.
Quit moaning, buy this.
Well, the latest one obviously had thought about it now, so the R5 Mark II has a exhaust vent on the sides, but it doesn't have a built-in fan. You still have to get an external fan if you really want to have top video recording performances, especially in the high resolution mode, because it's now capable of doing 8K 60 frames per second, which is kind of ridiculous.
That's crazy.
And it is crazy. Internal
it's
raw
recording.
It's
going to have a radiator. It's going to have a radiator on the front, like a car, isn't it?
Liquid cooling system.
So there are some red cameras that are liquid cooled, aren't there?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but I think red got there much sooner with the high frame rate 8K, but their solution was massively powerful processors and active cooling. So I don't know how.
And also they were really more just a video camera, and R5 on the other hand is more like a hybrid, so it does shoot 45 megapixel stills, and it can record videos at the same time. It's almost like the GX Lumix cameras, like it shoots stills and videos, which is kind of capable of both. When you can look at it spec side by side, they're kind of almost equivalent in terms of functionality and the target audience. Just one with full frame, one with a micro four third sensor, and but it's interesting because the R5 has been quite a popular hit despite the overheating issues on the video side, and people loved it for the stills capabilities. And the R5 has taken it one step further because now it has all the same thing as the R1, the upscaling, the noise reductions, and the apparently the sports priority recognition mode, so you can recognize basketball player, volleyball player, and something. Once again, I'm not entirely sure how that would work or how that difference to, let's say, a standard human and facial detection. And I'm not entirely sure what it will prioritize. When you say prioritizing basketball player, does it mean that it will focus on the basketball instead of the face?
The impression I got when it recognized individuals. I mean, you can imagine...
the one holding the ball, maybe. The one holding the ball, perhaps.
Well, I don't know. Maybe this is. I may have got the wrong impression from the specs that I've read. But imagine if you're covering UEFA finals, and you had a pretty strong suspicion that Harry Kane. Am I thinking of Harry Redknapp? The footballer.
Yeah.
You saw him running up the pitch. You're behind the opponent's goal. You are pretty sure he's going to take a shot.
Yeah.
That's a good argument for having your camera maintaining focus on that particular individual.
Right.
At that moment. That's all I can think of. And that's probably wrong. So don't take my word for it.
I'm not entirely sure. I'm not entirely convinced at this point. I know I really need to see some live action to see exactly how that works. And at the moment, I think all the AI modes so far is, to me, is useful, but also it can be quite gimmicky depending on how you look at it.
Exactly. I mean, if you don't tell it what to look for, it might decide something else is more important at the worst possible moment. So I don't know. This is something you only find out by using it. And I suppose the thing is with professional photographers, they use these cameras 8 hours a day or longer in very intense conditions. They will know them inside out. They will know exactly how they will behave and what they will do. So whereas I might pick one up and not have a clue what the hell's going on, anyone who uses these things professionally will know them inside out. So I guess they're going to know how to get the most out of them.
Yeah, and I suspect even myself included, and quite often that I don't use a lot of the recognition mode simply because I find them quite confusing, and so I rather just move the AF point to the point that I really want to track or focus on, and I just use that instead of
I think so.
enabling it. Obviously there are times that is very useful, but a lot of the day-to-day point-and-point shoot, and I just simply disable the recognition and just simply use the AF point instead. I find it way easier and way more accurate. But that's only me. You know, obviously everyone's different, especially those who may want to photograph something that's slightly faster moving, perhaps,
Well,
and they might be very useful.
I think there are lots of situations where creatively you might want a different focus point to the one the camera expects. If you're shooting a portrait, the camera might assume you want to focus on your subject, but maybe maybe you want to focus on a bouquet on the table in front, or maybe you want to focus on somebody's face in the background looking across. The camera won't always be able to guess correctly what it is you want to focus on. So it's always going to be a little bit. There's going to be a little bit of trust involved, and quite often the camera will. I mean, automation in cameras is great as long as it does use something you would have done anyway, and it saved you the trouble.
Yeah.
The difficulty arises when it starts doing stuff that you wouldn't have done.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly interesting from a Canon's point of view, or from as an outsider, so to speak, because I'm no longer using Canon cameras. Just looking at how they developed the R1, because the R1 has to be the flagship, and now the R1 is supposedly obviously competing with the likes of the Z9 and also the A9 from Sony, the top end. Sports cameras or sports rocket journalist cameras. The A9 obviously featured the global shutter sensor, which is, to me, that was probably the most exciting part of the whole camera. And the Z9, obviously the AF, the 3D tracking, all the other stuff is really cool. They all have their own strength, in so to speak. Which one is better? I guess there's no clear answer. It really depends on what sort of thing you shoot. But from a sensor's point of view, I kind of like Sony's global shutter approach simply because it's got no rolling shutter. That means it's interesting tech-wise, and also definitely for a lot of people who are now trying to capture fast speed moving subjects. You pan left and right. You really don't want to see any rolling shutter because it's going to ruin the image. Of course, you can enable mechanical shutter, but then you don't get the same speed as electronic shutter. So Sony, I think, will win that at this moment in time.
You can still get rolling shutter with mechanical shutter.
Yeah.
It's just less likely, I think.
Yeah.
But I was just having a look at what else is new with the EOS R5 too. So apart from the 8K 60, it too has the in-camera neural network noise reduction.
Yeah.
That's what it says here. But I'm not quite sure what else is in the Mark II that owners of the original will get upset about. Because you always do, don't you? You always do when a camera maker brings out a replacement for your camera. It's a very upsetting time because you think, oh, my old camera is not so good anymore.
Imagine the ones that just bought the camera like 2 months ago.
I know. These are the people I'm thinking of. And I think Canon often signals this stuff with price reductions, but even so, I don't know if you can still buy the EOS R5.
I'm pretty sure there's some dead stock somewhere. I'm pretty sure. Angela has
B&H will have them all.
Yeah, B&H will have them. Angela has something. The discussion of Canon should always deal with the hot topics: lens prices, no full frame third-party lens in RF mount. They have recently reopened the RF mount, right? You know, but
I think in a case-by-case way still.
Yep. So if I release a 35 1.4, you can't. You have to do something different. No, 36. 36.
Yeah. 35.5. F1.3. I don't know. I think there's some benefit for owners of the APS-C cameras, and because Canon's neglected them terribly. So I see Sigma's now got its 18 to 50 f2.8 is now available in an RF mount, but that's an APS-C lens. So
Yep.
in the full frame terms, I think it works two ways. Yes, you don't get the choice,
Yeah.
and some of the pro Canon lenses are ridiculously big and ridiculously expensive. But the consumer lenses, I think, on the whole, are a pretty good mixture at a pretty fair price. So I think that's the good part. You're still not in the same situation as a Sony user, where there's millions of lenses you can buy, and it's kind of a shame. But I don't know. I think if
Do you think, and since we talk about like the third party RF lenses, is that, do you think this is a missed opportunity from Canon's point of view? Because a lot of people did jump to Sony and Nikon simply because they got more choices. They don't have to, obviously affording the thousands of pounds of lenses at any one time. Not many people can afford that sort of money. They got a body, but they just want something slightly more affordable, and there are absolutely plenty like Viltrox, all the others that they have relatively good lenses for like £300, £400. They are okay lenses. They're not great top end lenses, but they are okay.
I think there are a couple of subtle things you lose that aren't immediately obvious when you step outside the brand. So, for example, with the Canon, you've got a very unified look and feel with the lenses.
Yeah.
The other thing is, if there were to be third-party lenses, you wouldn't have things like the custom dials, the custom controlled wheels, and also you wouldn't have like subtle little things like, I can't remember what Canon calls it, but they have a lens optimization option.
Oh, yeah,
which does quite clever stuff with edge definition, with diffraction and lens corrections, which you wouldn't get with the third-party lens, and it wouldn't work in Canon digital photo professional software if it wasn't a Canon lens. So with all the brands, you've got these little bits that aren't obvious that you lose.
There is, but then again, like myself included, because I do have a lot of third-party lenses on my Nikon, and I have to say, some of them are perhaps not as good as Nikon lenses, that's for sure. But at the same time, they are half the price, if not a quarter of the price. And when you throw into calculations, and for slight inconvenience, for getting like 90% of the performance. And to be honest, for a lot of the photograph that I do professionally, and let's say portrait, most of the time I'm looking at central sharpness anyway. I'm not looking at things that are outside of the edges, like on the edges, for instance. And like edge-to-edge sharpness doesn't come into play most of the time, and unless I do off-center shoots. So I think for even for a lot of general photographers who do day-to-day photographer who just go out for some snapshots, street photography here and there, I don't think it makes much difference when it comes to that. So having third-party options, cheaper options, would definitely kind of like encourage people to buy into the system.
Yeah, so Angelo's just made a good point, that there are no affordable f2.8 zooms. Now, you won't get any affordable f2.8 own brand zooms from anyone in the full frame market, but people like Sigma and Tamron do make f2.8 zooms that are a lot less expensive than the maker's own, and it's a shame that you can't get those for Canon. That is true. So I mean, for Sony, it's an odd lens. It's a Tamron 20-40 f2.8.
Yep.
That's like £700. There's no way Canon would ever make a lens of that kind.
Yeah.
For that price, it would be like £2,000 or something stupid. So that is a point. You're not going to get any affordable f2.8 zooms for Canons, sadly.
No. So that's to me still probably one of the sticking points. Hope I'm not upsetting any Canon users here, and but being an ex Canon guy, the days that I used to be able to afford an entire Canon system to shoot professionally are long gone. Yeah, I used to be able to have about, let's say, $6-7 in my bank account. I will be able to buy a whole system. The Trinity 2.8L lenses, a body, maybe
Yeah.
a couple of primes, all within a 6-7 grand. And nowadays you can barely get a body in a lens.
It
you
is.
know,
It is a bit crazy. That's the other thing. How with mirrorless, uh, whether or not the lenses are dramatically better, some of them are. Suddenly they cost twice what they used to. So when
yep,
I know it's been a few years, but I worked on a Nikon magazine in how long ago would that be? 6 or 7 years ago.
yeah,
You had a full frame Nikon DSLR, and you thought, oh, do you know what? I need the 14 to 24 f2.8, and it's about £1,000 or 1,200. I thought, oh, that's a lot of money. Well,
yeah,
today that is nothing. And same with a 24 to 72.8, and the 70 to 200 2.8. Those three Trinity lenses, as you were just saying, Jimmy, if you bought all three, you're going to be up towards, say, 3.5 grand.
yep.
You couldn't, if you did that today, then you're going to have to sell your car, aren't you? Or
Yep.
move into a smaller house or something.
Yep.
Because you're going to be closer to like 7.5, maybe 8K, I would think.
Yeah, it's quite ridiculous how prices have moved up over the years, and it's almost unimaginable. Because back in the film days, the incremental increase in prices were relatively slow, and also because the lens development also they don't get refreshed every 5 years. I mean, they're like lens, especially pro lenses. You talk about 10 years, 12 years before they upgrade the lens. So you're getting the same lens over time, as you know, most products do. Their street price will come down over time because, there's just plenty of stock available. So there are bargains around. So if you are in the market looking for pro lenses back in the days, you can often score 70 to 200 f2.8 L lens, for instance, for less than £1,000. It's quite easy to find one that's less than £1,000, brand new. These days, it's 2.5 times the price, 2.5 grand, and easy for one of those lenses. Yeah, obviously they are better. I have to say that they are better lenses now. They are optically better, sharper. They're designed for digital mirrorless cameras, high megapixel count sensors. But then again, you can also say that if you don't need the sharpest lenses or the latest lenses, I think Chuck just mentioned that you can actually have some old EF lenses around for relatively cheap. I don't know if I can score one for under $100 though. Maybe they're missing a zero there. I think maybe under £1,000, and that will be quite more acceptable. But I think that I was looking at some of the old EF lenses actually, and because I can now use the adapter to use it on my Nikon, so I was thinking about getting some of the old primes from the olden days of EFL lenses. So the 51.2L, you can find them for about £450. The 85 at 1.2L, you can get one for £600. So they are quite cheap lenses. You can't compare to the latest series now, but they're still good lenses. They are.
That it's not optically as good as modern lenses, but I always thought the 17 to 40, the EF 17 to 40 is quite good.
Yep.
For a full frame ultra wide zoom with that kind of zoom range. Optically, I'm not so sure, but good value. But yeah, it's something. I think I might give this a bit of thought, because I could just put the EF adapter on my EOS R8, couldn't I? And try a few.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Absolutely. I think it's a good option as well, because now there are adapters around, and if you do have a Nikon camera, you can actually use the AF adapter, so you can use EF lenses on it as well, fully supported. So I'm quite curious. I'm definitely going to maybe try one or two of those lenses. I already tried one of the only lens I still have with Canon is the 40mm f2.8 pancake lens, which I really liked. And so I've been using that on my Nikon without any hiccup. So that really works. So now give me another thoughts about using maybe a 51.2, 85-1.2, some of these old exotic lenses that I used to love and kind of miss as well. So I'll be able to bring them back to life, and it should be quite an interesting thing.
I think some of the older Nikon DSLR lenses are quite decent as well. I think so if you got the Nikon adapter
Yep.
for your ZF. The thing is, the balance would be awful because these old
It's
DSLR
huge,
lenses
isn't
are
it?
quite big. Um,
Yeah.
but some we feel generally the mirrorless lenses are better, but there are still some good DSLR lenses out there. I
Oh
think
yeah.
the Nikon 24 to 120 f4 is optically as good as any modern 24 to 120 f4 for mirrorless.
Yep. And
Um, but you can't always rely on all DSLR lenses being good, but some of them are.
some of them are. I mean, especially I think both in Canon and also Nikon, and
Yeah.
the SLR lenses, the 135 f2, both Canon and Nikon 135 f2 are magnificent, and
Are they?
they're relatively affordable now. So if you get one of those lenses and mount it on your even modern digital camera, you'll be surprised how sharp they are. I mean, obviously, if you have a 24 megapixel sensors, because they were working brilliantly in 24 megapixel DSLR, so that means that they should, in theory, works as good in a 24 megapixel mirrorless camera, simply because same megapixel count, it should actually have the same sharpness. I can't say the same thing about 45, anything higher than that, because the high megapixel count does magnify a lot of things.
Yeah, let's not forget though that Nikon did make the D850.
Yeah.
And then D800 series 36 megapixels, D850 47. For a number of years, it was producing lenses for cameras with this kind of resolution.
Yeah.
So, I mean, particularly if you're shooting with the 24 megapixel ZF, I would have thought these older lenses, they might not be great optically, but they were certainly not designed for lower resolutions. They were designed for that kind of resolution.
So it should still be fine. So that will be interesting.
So I just had a look. That lens I mentioned, the Nikon 14 to 2024.
Yeah.
Excellent condition, £594.
Yeah, there you go. Wow.
And that's for a constant aperture, ultra wide, full frame lens. But the only thing is, for anyone who's not used them, those lenses are ridiculous. The 24 to 70, especially the VR one, it's as bigger than most 70 to 200s these days. So I think
the modern Nikon lens is the same.
I think that's a particular Nikon DSLR thing, because the F mount has got quite a narrow lens throat.
Yeah.
And I think that meant that for these constant aperture zooms, that impacted the length of the lens. So that's why they were so long, because they're accommodating.
But the strange thing is,
lens throat.
But the strange thing is the new Z mount lenses are equally long. You know, the 70 to 200 VR 2.8 is like 2 feet long. That lens is just ridiculous.
So is this because the focus groups are getting very big and they're needing very powerful actuators? Or is it the glassware is just getting heavier and more difficult to move around? I don't know what the answer is, but it is definitely a thing. Yeah.
It is. I mean, like on the other hand, though, Canon's 70 to 200 2.8 has gone smaller, and the new one is interesting.
It's different approach, but I think there's been a bit of dislike about that, because it has an extending barrel, and people associate that with consumer lenses, don't they? So, you know, if you're Canon, you can't win.
No, but that's an interesting. Okay, we'll be a little bit off topic here. How many of you hate? Or how many of you prefer internal focusing group or elements? So that basically the lens doesn't extend or retract; it just stays the same size. Just like if you guys are Olympus, that would be like the 40 to 150, because everything's internal. The lens doesn't move in and out. But there are also lenses are designed for travel or compact when you're moving about, and so they collapse this into a very short distance or very compact dimension.
Yeah.
When it's closed, when you start using it, it extends back out, and I don't know. I mean, I don't mind either. And to be quite honest, I would like a very small form factor when I'm moving around. So that means I don't need a huge bag. So when I collapse it, it just basically slot into a smaller bag. I'll be able to move away, and as long as I need it, I'll just extend it again. So I have no problem with that. I know people may have the perception, like you said. Oh, when the lens zoom like moving in and out is going to be a consumer lens. It doesn't look professional.
There is that. I mean, I think I don't know. I think that there's a lot of talk around internal zooms and how useful they are for video gimbals.
Yeah.
I'm not entirely convinced, because just because the zoom is internal, it doesn't mean the center of gravity isn't shifting as you zoom. So I think that kind of lens is probably better for gimbals, but you might still need a pretty powerful gimbal to overcome these weight shifts. But anyway, I do quite like the idea of internal zooms. I think it does look quite nice, but I just wonder if you end up with a lens that's just made longer to accommodate that zoom rate, that shifting length.
Yeah. Well, Steve has a comment here. Internal is professional, also good for weather sealing. And that point, I agree.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
That point, I absolutely agree. And I think no matter how well you seal the lens, when the whole barrel moving in and out, it's going to be sucking stuff in or out.
It's going to suck dust in, isn't it? It's going to suck some dust in. I mean, not if it's properly sealed, but that's why you buy an L series lens, isn't it? So you have to take all these things into account, I guess.
Yeah. So once again, there is no perfect solution. There's no kind of a perfect way to say something. If you want something compact, then you go for the collapsible option. But if you want something that is totally, utterly bomb-proof, dust-proof, splash-proof, whatever-proof, then you probably want something that's completely sealed inside. And that would be the case.
There's a retracting Canon kit lens, the RF 24 to 50. Yep. Which I think most people think is awful because it's cheap. It's got a short zoom range. It's got a very poor aperture range. I think it's an f4.5 to 6.3 or something ridiculous for a 2x zoom. Yeah. And it needs heavy digital corrections. But the bottom line is, even though it feels like it came out of a Christmas cracker, the corrected image quality is actually rather good. So I think this is something that Canon's doing quite well at the moment with these cheaper RF lenses.
Yeah.
They're a lot better than you expect for the money.
Well, another good example would be the good old Olympus 40 to 150 f4 Pro.
Right.
You know, this is a retractable lens, fully weather sealed as well. But when you use it, it does extend this bit first before you start using. Yeah. And when you finish using, when you want to just go back to travel, put it back to the back, you can just collapse it. So it's quite a tiny lens by comparison. So I mean, this is one of my favorite travel lenses, by the way. So
it's a bit like the 8 to 25, isn't it? It's big enough already and then when you use it, it gets bigger still because it's a retracting lens. But,
and John Young actually, I think he's very keen in looking into all the old Nikon lenses now. He just said, I just bought a mint Nikon 105-14. That's a brilliant lens for $900. And then he found another one, the mint 500 f8 mirror lens for $100. That is cheap. That is really cheap, actually. I don't mind trying that actually on the ZF for $100. I would definitely try that. That's interesting.
Also, talking about internal focusing, does anyone remember how dreadful it was to be using a camera with a kit lens where the front element rotates during focusing? Do you remember?
You don't want to put any polarizers on that thing.
Polarizers, grads, nothing. That was bad. You couldn't really have a lens with either, could you?
No.
Can't think how that worked. Yeah. Okay. Thank goodness those days are gone.
I know. And Chuck here, 70. Yep. Sorry. Go on.
I was only going to say, just responding to an earlier remark about Canon lens hoods. You only get a lens hood with it. That upsets a lot of people, including one of my lens tester colleagues. He gets very upset about that, and he's right. So all the lenses I've got, if I wanted lens hoods for all of them, I'd be in it for about £300 or £400 for lens hoods. It's stupid. So I just don't use them.
But that's not just Canon though. I mean, like, all the other manufacturers have the same problem. You know, like
I don't know.
The Nikon lenses, unless you go for the really high end stuff, they don't give you a lens hood. Like,
don't they?
The 40 to f2, I have. There's no lens hood. The 28 f1, the 28 f2.8, that got no lens hood. you have to spend at least £600-700 to get something with a lens hood. And what happened to it? I mean, Canon hasn't got any lens hood way back in the DSLR days. You know, they never had any lens hood unless you go for L series lenses.
But you get lens hoods with I don't want to say something that turns out to be wrong, but say with Fujifilm, with Fujinon lenses, you always get a hood. If you buy a Sigma lens, you'll get a hood. If you buy a Tamron lens, you'll get a hood. So I wasn't aware of that situation with Nikon, but I think it is a pain point for Canon shooters.
Yeah, yeah. And how much does a Canon, like a plastic hood, would cost? You know, like they're not, you know, from a manufacturing point of view, they're not that expensive. And all the Chinese lenses you get, they've thrown in a lens hood, you know, like a default thing. You know, like whatever Chinese lens you buy, it always comes with a hood.
Oh, completely off topic. Since we're talking about prices, this is the optional 40mm direct vision viewfinder to clip onto a Ricoh GL3.
Oh yeah,
so
yeah.
It's just like got a couple of lenses and some bright line frames to help you frame without the 40mm equivalent lens.
These things are expensive. They're about like 200 quid.
$250, £299. It's not an EVF.
No, I know.
A direct vision eyepiece.
Yep.
And there's no electrical contacts. There's no viewfinder information.
Just a piece of glass.
As well, at least 2 pieces of glass and a bit of foil. So I'm reviewing the Ricoh at the moment. The camera itself, fine, it's what it is. But that viewfinder, it's madness, absolute madness.
Well, you know, like to give you some perspective, that's not as bad because coming from being a Leica shooter in the film days. One of these things would cost an upward of £600-700, and they're ridiculous. They're as much as a lens itself.
And not a Leica lens, though.
No, not a Leica lens, but a normal lens. But then you know, it's ridiculous. Although these days we rarely use a bright viewfinder like this now. And most people, if they do want to use the viewfinder, they use the EVF because that's what you see, what you get. They prefer that more than just using that. But I can see the appeal, you know, like especially from a GR point of view, because they have the snap focus function. So that will kind of give you a more like a kind of snappy street moment kind of a capturing method. Just look at a viewfinder, you've liked that shot, frame, bang, that's it. You get a shot.
Have you used them, Jimmy?
The GR?
Yeah.
No, I only use a film camera. The way back now, the GS1 or the G1, whatever. I can't remember the name now.
I don't want to spend ages on this because we're not talking about Ricoh, but the snap focus, it's an electrically driven lens. Even if you use the snap focus, it still has to drive the lens to that focus point. So it is not properly instantaneous. That's a bit annoying, but not as annoying as Canon not giving you lens hoods. That is probably annoying.
Oh yeah, that's for sure. And I want to hear Terry's story, because Terry said internal focus is stronger in case you fall. Ask me how I know. Terry, please do share your experience. And I have to tell you, I have my share of dropping lenses and stuff like that, and I've broken a few in my time as a photographer.
I was doing some photography with A7R2 and a Sigma 65F2, which had a circular metal hood, because Sigma doesn't mess about with lens hoods. I tripped on some rocks. Apart from me getting bound up, the camera came out of my hand, hit the ground, lens hood first. The hood took all the impact. None of the rock ever got near the glass. So... No. I don't particularly rate lens hoods for stopping flare, because I think that's a kind of marginal case. Sometimes it may, sometimes it may not. But as an extra means of protection for expensive bit of glass, yes, I think they have a value there for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I never had any good experience when it comes to dropping lenses, because they always have some problem afterward. And
Yeah.
I guess if you have some of these slightly older, simpler lenses, let's say some of these old f4 primes or whatever, and they may be a bit more rugged when it comes to withstand certain impact. For my
I
case, a
think,
lot of my 1.2 lenses, 1.4 primes, they are quite delicate. Anything sort of
yeah.
drop, you misalign one of the elements or whatever, and then things will become horrible, and you have to get it fixed.
Well, the thing is, back in the old days, when lenses were quite simple, you might have multiple elements, but they were all cemented into fixed relative locations. And when you focused, the whole lens would rack in and out. There were no internally moving elements. So I think they were probably a bit stronger for that reason. They probably weren't particularly good optically, again, for that reason. But I think lenses now are so sophisticated and so delicately poised inside that they are more easily damaged. I'm going to can anyone hear this?
Oh yes. That's quite horrible.
I'm going to call that the Fujifilm clonk. So I think with a lot of lenses, when they're switched off, the internal focus groups are not parked. This is my theory. They're just left floating. So that with this lens, and it's not the only one, if you put it on a camera and switch a camera on, the knocking goes away. But if you're just putting it in your bag or just sorting your lenses out or whatever you're doing, there's a nasty, nasty clonk, and it's worrying. I don't like it. But I've noticed that more and more in lenses, that when the internal components aren't necessarily parked properly when the camera's off. So
yeah, that's not good. I mean, I always hate that. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's a normal thing. Maybe it's designed for that. But anything's rocking inside when you're moving about doesn't inspire any confidence in me.
That's why I didn't particularly. That's one reason I didn't particularly like the Fujinon 33 1.4 and what's the other one? The 23 1.4. They're fantastic lenses, but I didn't like the knock when you they're off the camera.
Chuck just said the same thing about Sony lenses as well.
Do they?
That's interesting.
When the camera's off, that is interesting. Yeah.
Maybe it is a thing. It's a modern thing.
I don't. It upsets my sense of engineering. You shouldn't have stuff rattling around.
Right.
Normally it costs that much.
That's weird because none of my Olympus lenses make that kind of noise. That's a good thing.
my Mark 1 12 to 40 makes a bit of a noise.
Oh,
there's a little clonk. There's a little clonk. But it's had a hard life, so maybe there's a reason. but that goes away when it's on the camera and switched on.
Yep. So let's bring it back down to the Canon, Canon Earth, the Canon planet, and I would like to hear your thoughts about our earlier discussions about computational stuff, because as you know, full frames were quite a bit behind compared to the likes of Olympus/OM system when it comes to computational stuff, because we have live bulb, live composite, and things like that. And obviously live ND is the kind of latest kind of tech that Michael Fawcett has or still enjoy at the moment. Full frame weren't, or even APS-C weren't even doing anything close to that sort of capabilities or features. But now with Canon's R1 and R5 and with AI, noise reduction and upscaling, it's starting to kind of introduce a computational feature and computational side for full frame cameras, and I'm pretty certain now Canon's doing it. I'm pretty sure Sony and Nikon are starting to look into similar sort of thing to compete. They might have different things. They may not have the same feature or kind of competing features, but they will start thinking about computational stuff, and maybe given time, Canon would be starting to look into things that what Olympus OM system were doing, then live composite, live bulb, and that kind of thing as well. It's now they're starting it, and pretty sure it's all about programming. It's about designing a program within the camera to run that sort of algorithm to create that sort of thing. So it's an interesting thing from from an outsider looking to how Canon's implementing these sort of thing now, they're opening a door, a fresh door, a new door into computational photography. I would be interesting to hear your thoughts about that in particular, simply because as a Michael Four Third guy, as an Olympus guy, we were asking for in-camera noise reduction for a while, and now Canon's beat Olympus to it with the full frame sensor.
Yeah, I don't know. It seems to me that it's kind of racing two directions. It's the better it makes the sensors, the less it needs AI noise reduction. So it's kind of solving the same problem by going in two different directions at once. I don't know. I'm not entirely convinced. I'm also this whole noise thing. I've still got to be in my bonnet about that, because I think before you consider a camera noisy, just compare the JPEGs with your raw software. I'm always picking on Lightroom for this, but Adobe Camera Raw, as used in Lightroom and Adobe Camera Raw itself, does make your noise worse.
Yeah.
And it doesn't do anything for your fine detail either. You can increase the sharpness, and then you have to fight off the extra noise with noise reduction. It's difficult to arrive at a kind of combination of definition and low noise as good as the JPEG from the camera. So don't judge your camera's noise from what Lightroom shows you.
No,
it's the same. If you I would urge anyone who's bothered by noise and detail in images to compare different raw converters, because you may be blaming the camera for something that's happening during the raw processing. I would say Capture One is almost always visibly better than Adobe Camera Raw, however you juggle the settings. DxO, Pure Raw and Pure Raw and Photolab can be better, can be very...
Yep. Rod, your connection has dropped out and it's frozen. So hopefully you're going to be back. And so yeah, it's an interesting thing for me, at least, and especially coming from being an Olympus guy. We've enjoyed a lot of the computational photography for some years now, and we all enjoyed it, right? And because we all very fond with the likes of...
That's what happens when I go on too long. Jimmy throws me out. It's very subtle.
I know. Carl actually said that, look at that, his comment I'm bringing out here. Shit, Adobe's messing with Rod's internet again.
Yeah. Do you know that could be it? I never thought of that.
It's all Adobe's fault. It's all Adobe's fault. It's all the noise reduction algorithm you're running. Yeah. So yeah, I think that whether it's a gimmick or not, it's certainly it's the thought that counts, because it's now opening an idea that other manufacturers can now explore.
Fake bokeh.
Fake bokeh. Yeah.
Don't need fast lenses anymore, because you can shoot to any ISO with the AI noise reduction.
Yeah.
And you can fake the bokeh you can't get from a wide aperture. So
yeah. Funny, actually, I thought about something. Olympus did actually had AI noise reduction. If you remember, if you use the OI photo share thing, the desktop app, you can actually use AI noise reduction in the app. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, and even though I'm an Olympus guy, I can't remember exactly, but I think since the OM1, if you look at the JPEG images, they were internally noise reduced in camera using AI. So the JPEG does. So I'm not entirely sure, because it was never really a kind of big advertising thing or marketing thing for Olympus or OM system.
I think I've tried that in the desktop application, and I think my conclusion was it looked a bit better, but it wasn't a big leap.
It certainly has cleaned up the noises, but it looks rather plasticky in a way. And
so not very AI at all then.
Well, it's better. It's better than the non-AI noise reduction, that's for sure. Because
Okay.
the
Okay.
non-AI would just basically just mush up everything. It kind
Yeah.
of like a paste, and
Yeah.
the AI noise reduction does give you some definitions in file, but not overly so like the likes of Topaz or the DxO, for instance. But I did run a side-by-side comparison some time ago now, when that feature first came about. I think I did a comparison on my channel between the DxO Pure Raw and also the Olympus own desktop software side by side. There are some differences, but the you may actually find it a bit surprised because it's not that much difference when you come to extreme high ISO noise reduction. Let's say if you're shooting at 25,600 on the Micro Four Thirds sensor, if you run the AI noise reduction with the Olympus app compared to the DxO Pure Raw, you find the difference weren't exactly that much. And perhaps the DxO does edge out a little bit more on details, simply perhaps because it's got the optical module that helps correcting certain things or enhance certain things. That may come into play. I'm not entirely sure, but it's certainly interesting. But now let's go back to Canon. So Canon is doing the same thing,
Yeah.
and
So,
yeah, it can be something that they are thinking more in a way.
so I think the key for the people likely to buy the R1 is it must be instantaneous and bulletproof. Because if there's any
Yeah,
messing around, I don't think they're going to be interested.
but perhaps. But then again, you and I know that shooting full frame, 6400, 12,800, even 25,600 isn't the end of days in using a full frame camera, especially when you use a fast prime or fast lenses. And
Yeah.
I don't think it's that much of a deal. And I know Canon has said that the AI noise reduction is two stop. So advantage. So let's say if you're shooting 12,800, the file may look like, I don't know, 1600 or 3200. But
I
then
I'd be
3200 is pretty decent.
I'd be very disappointed if the R1 didn't produce very good looking images at ISO 12,800.
Yeah.
It's the sort that's what a camera like this should be built for. Hopefully, it doesn't take AI to do it. Hopefully, the sensor is good enough that it can do that anyway. You would hope
Yeah.
so, wouldn't you?
Yeah. So then again, I'm not entirely sure whether this particular feature, I know it's still early days to talk about it, and unless we're
Yeah,
starting to
yeah,
see some
yeah.
real actions. But I will be curious whether the manufacturers actually think about, like Canon, thinking about, okay, our full frame are good, like we can shoot 25,600 without too much image quality degradations.
Yeah, yeah.
And then what is the point of having AI reduction anyway? Kind of like creating a solution for, well,
A
for
problem.
not
It's
for,
like a solution for a problem we shouldn't have.
yeah, exactly. So I don't know. It's the thought. Like I said, it's the thought that counts. Maybe they're just opening something for something more to come. The
Well,
cow actually has an interesting point here. That is the term AI used way too
don't
much these days.
don't even go there. My impression of this is that marketers use AI for any product where neural networks or deep learning was used at any point in the development of those products. It does not indicate that those products have artificial intelligence of their own. It's just that there is an AI element in their manufacture or
Yeah,
design or
yeah,
construction or whatever. I think the R1, it has an AI processor. That doesn't mean that the camera has any kind of advanced artificial intelligence. It just means that it has a processor specifically designed for running AI type processes quickly.
yeah.
So it's a performance thing. I don't think it necessarily indicates any kind of extra
No,
intelligence.
no,
It just
not.
allows much more complex processes to be carried out more quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that basically it. And but then again, all so-called AI technologies within the camera industry are the same anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, it's yeah. So it'll be interesting to see whether if the likes of Sony and Canon are gonna catch up. I mean, like Nikon is gonna do the similar thing or catch up with Canon when it comes to noise reductions and upscaling or whatever other things they might think about. At the same time, I also would like to see if Michael Four Third people, OM or Lumix gonna also catch up when it comes to noise reduction, because I think for Michael Fourth especially, it's more beneficial when it comes to noise reduction.
It's a perception as much as anything else. If it helps sell more cameras, they'll do it, because most people who don't shoot on MFT are convinced that it has terrible noise.
Yeah,
and they won't be persuaded otherwise. So maybe AI noise reduction will be introduced to try and encourage these doubters to try the gear. But as to how useful it will be, I don't know, because noise doesn't come on its own.
No,
it also comes with a loss of detail, and it's not just a case of taking out the noise.
Yeah,
it's a case of restoring a detail which the camera would have recorded at a lower ISO, but has been lost at the higher ISO. This is why so many old style noise reduction tools gave such horrible results, because they took all the noise away. So you ended up with a noiseless image with not much detail, which looked even worse. So you'd rather have the noise back.
Absolutely.
So it's restoring. It's not just removing noise; it's also restoring lost detail, and you do lose detail at high ISOs.
You do, regardless format, you always lose details, and obviously full frame has the advantage simply because they're either high megapixel count or because the pixels are bigger in general, and it does retain more details.
Whether Nikon would do it is a moot point, because the Z9 doesn't really have a problem with resolution, so I wouldn't have thought the Z9 or the Z8 would ever have AI upscaling, because the problem doesn't really exist. AI noise reduction, maybe so, just so that they can be seen to be just as advanced as their main rival, because that's how this stuff works, isn't it?
So how many of you would think that AI noise reduction will be the next big thing in any cameras that we're using today? I think it'll be interesting to see if they do that, and I mean the likes of DxO and Topaz going to be in trouble, because that's what they're selling, right? They're selling an external noise reduction a solution.
I think there are other issues with high ISOs. I've already covered lots of detail. There's also the loss of dynamic range. I'm not sure how AI can help you restore that. But my main concern is that sensors are now so intrinsically good at high ISOs. Is this really such a problem anymore, or are we simply being sold a solution to something that went away anyway? I don't know.
Yeah, it's going to be hard.
So I think
it's going to be hard to say.
Micro Four Thirds, I agree with you that could be a good position to take with that. But also, you've got to remember that even on a fast computer, AI noise reduction is not instantaneous. I've got a Mac Studio with some stupid processor in it and lots of RAM, and it still takes 6 or 7 seconds for DxO Pure Raw to process a raw file to remove, for its D prime XD2 noise reduction. It's not an instantaneous job. It is very, very processor intensive job. Maybe Canon's new AI accelerator can do it quickly, but unless it can do it instantaneously.
Yeah, man, I think this is exactly the point. I think I believe someone actually started saying, and was it Chuck? I think it's Chuck here, and assumed that it would process the noise after shooting, otherwise it would kill the FPS.
Well, it's tricky, isn't it? Because it depends on where in the pipeline it's doing it. Is it doing it to the raw file? In which case, conceivably, it could do it while the images are being buffered before they're saved to the card. I don't know. But if it's doing it to JPEGs, well, I guess it's the same argument. It would have to do this somewhere invisible so that it's doing it. So it's still shooting, buffering all these shots, and it's not instantaneous, but it's near enough that you don't see it happening, and you still get your processed JPEGs, I guess.
I mean, for any sort of previewers, I think they're going to show the JPEG anyway, and in the back of the camera. So it'll be interesting to see how that process work.
Well, that's the other thing, though, that the EVF, there's not going to be time to do any of this clever processing for the EVF image. And presumably the R1 does blackout-free instantaneous viewfinder image. It's not going to have time to process those JPEGs for the viewfinder, is it? So I don't know. We have to see how this is going to work in practice, don't we?
So they're going to have a huge buffer, almost like a 2 terabyte buffer in the camera to be able to hold that data and process at the same time. But just like we discussed earlier, and also I think Chuck also mentioned that it will kill the battery, and I believe it will have impact on the battery life, and that's for sure, because that sort of processing does require a lot of processing power and means that you're going to use a lot of energy, just like any computer would. So that will be interesting.
Will it need a fan?
Yes, liquid cool fan system. That's something that we will do. And Steve actually said that the Pentax K1M has some internal noise reduction, and I believe that's a standard noise reduction that we always seen in most cameras. And you do see an option about noise reduction, whether low, medium, or strong. Usually that's the case. But I suspect that
most noise reduction you can control is done in camera to JPEGs. Sometimes there is noise reduction in the AD converter, but you don't have any control over that. That's just part of that particular process. So usually the in-camera noise reduction will be JPEGs, not RAW files.
Yeah. Well, just to throw the spanner into the ring as well, and the next big thing you hear this first from here is that I think if they're starting to do this, imagine that one day they're going to have a strong enough processor to process video in real time. I know they're already doing AI noise reduction in video, but imagine they're going to start interpolating frames in between and make the video look smoother without having to use an ND filter. So let's say if you choose the wrong frame rate or wrong shutter angle to record a video, and you have this skip frame, and somehow the program does some magic and smoothen everything out, it looks like cinematic. It doesn't have any horrible jittery footage, and I think that would be something, because the likes of Final Cut Pro is already doing that. It's starting to interpolating frame to create slow motions for you, and so that's possible. And if now desktop software is starting to do that, same as Topaz Video AI is doing the same thing, doing slow motion by interpolating frames in between. There's software starting now, so in very soon, if you start to see very powerful processor in camera, you may start to see that feature coming along.
Very soon you won't have to go to these things at all, because you'll be able to, your camera will be able to figure out what it would have looked like if it'd gone.
And Carl's funny. We are not going to sell any 1.2 lenses now with all these AI noise reduction features.
No. It'll be a firmware update for f1.2 simulation.
Isn't it like Leica starting to have that app, right? The camera app on the smartphone, the Leica app that simulate the Noctilux look.
I've used it. It's it kind of simulates the kind of look many people might imagine the Noctilux has, who haven't actually used one. It's a bit like, do you know what I mean? It's a bit like Fujifilm's film simulation. Sorry, Fujifilm. They look like how you imagine the films would have looked if you'd tried them, but you didn't. But it looks nice.
But if you've used it before, it's different.
It's different.
So there you go. Go.
So I've used the Leica app. It's quite fun. It's quite nice. Then the interface, of course, being Leica, it's really classy.
Yeah.
But the photos, well, they're kind of like the photos you get from you for the regular camera app. They're nice.
Yeah.
And you get little Leica looks, but it's not quite the same thing. But
no.
At least they don't claim it's AI.
If it is the same thing, Leica wouldn't have sold wouldn't need to sell the Noctilux for 10 grand, right?
The app is on a subscription. It's not a free app. I think it's
a subscription, right? I think.
Yeah, 80 or 90 pounds a year.
Whew, that's extortionate. Well, that's a Leica thing, though.
Well, it's quite a lot for a camera app, isn't it?
It's a Leica thing.
With a few filters.
It's got a red dot on the app.
and you get the name of famous Leica lenses on the interface, because nobody else, they wouldn't license that to anyone. this is the only app that can look like
Uh,
a Leica.
they just changed the name a little bit, just spell it like slightly differently.
Yes.
Yeah, instead of N like Noctilux NOCT, there's NOOC Nutilux.
Yes. Optilux.
There you go.
Whatever.
There you go. They got a new Chinese app coming up in like for half the price. Well, it's probably developed by Chinese anyway. You never know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I guess anything that you may want to say about Canon, and because I'm more focusing on the two new cameras, the R1 and the R5 Mark II.
So
Maybe just to wrap it up, thinking about what future holds for Canon. Then
I'm a bit bothered by what's there for people just starting and enthusiasts, because I've been saying how I rate the kind of intermediate consumer lenses. They're still not exactly cheap, and the cameras are even more not cheap.
yeah,
So for a beginner, where you're going to start, you could start with like the APS-C cameras, like the R100. That is cheap. R50, the R10, the R7. I know the R7 is different, but the R50 and R10, if anyone asked me what the difference was, wouldn't have a clue. So you've got 4 cameras, and I think there are probably 4 lenses. But if you think back to Canon's DSLR days, the EFS system, the APS-C system, was full of lenses. It's a very rich ecosystem. And when you finally exhausted that, you could go up to the full frame EF mount cameras if you want. But now the APS-C RFS ecosystem is tiny, and really nobody's going to stay there for very long. They're going to figure, do you know what, I think I should get a full frame camera. So to me, they are not in the same class as the older APS-C DSLR. It's much more cynical, I'm afraid, in my opinion.
Do you think it's a budget issue or is a business strategy issue?
I hate to say it, but I think it is a strategy issue.
Then why don't they just kill the APS-C line? They just concentrate on full frame. Why do they still introduce or keeping the APS-C cameras?
It's a cheap price point to get people in. The EOS R100 and kit lens, it's almost as cheap as the old formatting of the 1000D or the 1300D. It's a very, very, very cheap entry point, and it's reasonable sort of camera.
Well, but then they can do what Sony does, right? Selling a 5-year-old full frame cameras at a much lower price point.
Yes, but would you want a 5-year-old Canon? We talked about the sensors, haven't we?
Well, that's true.
But no, I think beginners are going to find themselves in a position where in a year they're going to have to do a big upgrade, because once you've got these APS-C cameras, there's not really anywhere else to go. You've got one wide angle zoom. I haven't tested it. I'm sure it's all right. I can't imagine it's amazing.
Yeah.
You've got a couple of kit lens options. I think there's a telephoto zoom.
Yeah.
But after that, all you can do is buy RF lenses.
Yeah.
And they're big and quite expensive. And then you're going to think, well, you know what? These RF lenses, they only work. They're really, really effective on a full frame body. And you're going to think, well, do you know what? I'm going to swap now, buy a full frame Canon, which was perhaps the plan all along.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, Corey's in the house. Hi, Corey. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly very interesting. I think in multiple fronts, what's Canon latest development. But I share your view about the APS-C line, and I don't. It's almost doing the same thing as what the EOS M series, right? Which is kind of dead already. And
well, except that was a complete evolutionary dead end, wasn't it? There was nowhere else to go because there was no upgrade path.
No,
you couldn't.
I don't know now. But, now we're looking at that, and so in terms of the big three, the Sony, Canon, and Nikon, and how do you see them now competing each other in text, in space, in market share? They're all competing the same thing. They all now have a stills focus product lines, and they also have a video focused product line, and some kind of in between, just the hybrid kind of groups. I don't know. Yeah, I think it's a bloodbath at the moment between the three. It's no definitive answer. One is good or bad, and they're all very capable. Is it down to brand loyalty? I'm not entirely sure. They're trying to outdo each other, but at the same time, when you look at the specs, start to inspect a little bit more, they're all basically the same thing.
Yeah, no, this is where somebody's going to have to jump in and stop me when I say something that's wrong. But anyway, this is just an opinion. I think a lot of it is down to marketing and perception. I think Sony's pitch is power, 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 power. Like Jeremy Clarkson driving a Ferrari. Power! So I think that's Sony.
Yeah.
Panasonic is really pushing itself as a video specialist. But if you look at it properly, if you compare it with Canon, take say the Canon EOS R8. Canon doesn't really push that hard as a video camera in the same way that Panasonic does with the S5 II. And yet, the R8 can shoot 4K 60 oversampled full width, which the S5 II can't.
Crop. Yep.
Yeah, which seems to me a real own goal, because these days in a camera at this kind of price point, you kind of expect 4K 60.
Yeah.
You would not. It would be quite a pleasant surprise if it turns out you based your whole project on full width uncropped video, and then you think, oh, do you know what? I'll grab a 60p slow mo, and then you haven't got the same angle of view.
No,
I mean, you'd find out before that happened, but it's not good. I mean, this is what's irritating about these cameras. So every setting you want to use, every combination of resolution and frame rate, something gets taken away. So like with Panasonic, we can do it, but you can't be full width, or with Canon, I don't know, I'm making this up. In Canon, it might be, you can do that, but it's only going to be 8-bit, and you can't have Canon log. There's always something for everything you want to do. Always something that's been taken away. But I think Nikon's not playing the whole thing very well. I think Nikon needs more video ambassadors.
Not yet, but then again, the acquisition of Red camera is signify a move is coming, and I'm still entirely not quite convinced how they are going to integrate Red into Nikon. No. And Red is such an established brand, like Red cameras is known in the filmmaking industry, and so I don't think they're going to just kill it off and just integrate it into Nikon and brand it as Nikon cameras. I'm not sure at the moment.
There's no technology crossover, is there?
No.
I think it's just an addition to the portfolio. I don't think you'll ever see any kind of merging of technologies. I just can't see it.
To my eyes, Nikon is kind of like the equivalent of Olympus or OM system in just different format, because like Olympus OM system is more like a still focus camera, so all the cameras were always going to be still focus. There are video features, but not as rich as the likes of Lumix, for instance, which is kind of a full feature a video camera if you want it to be. So it does 4K 60, it does all the decent stuff. But then again, it lacks the Kodak, it lacks the resolutions, it lacks this and that. A lot of the things that just not exist at all.
I think perhaps where Canon is in danger of losing it is the vlogging market. We know how big that is. Yep. Because I don't think it really has a compelling vlogging lineup. If the cheapest camera with IBIS is the EOS R6 II, that's not a good place to start from, is it?
No.
And in the APS-C arena, you've got the EOS R7, which does have IBIS, but it's like a £1,300 camera. It's not a cheap camera.
No.
So I don't think Canon has really tackled the first vlogging camera market successfully. I think Sony's done it pretty well. I mean, the ZV-E10 isn't great, but it is cheap. And the Mark II does look a whole lot better. Nikon Z30, no IBIS, but it's cheap and it's nicely made. So this is where I think Canon is missing a market. Its baseline for expenditure is quite high.
I mean, I think what this is another thing that was slightly outside of Canon talk at the moment, but I think that people always misunderstood the vlogging market in general, and people who vlog don't really care much about full frameness, if I use the word correctly. I don't know if you understand full frameness. You know, like shallow depth of field, bokeh, high ISO stuff.
No, it's often more of an embarrassment than a benefit.
So
if you're trying to film yourself,
sense, yeah, exactly.
Vloggers are showing the audience where they are, for which you have to see what's behind them. So shallow depth of field isn't a big help.
And that is the reason why many of them still use a phone, because they don't need shallow depth of field. They don't need ultra high quality video like a cinema camera. They don't need that. And as a matter of fact, like the format that most likely to succeed in the vlogging market when it comes to interchangeable systems would be Micro Four Thirds. Because it's small enough. The IBIS is way stronger than any other bigger format. It's small enough to be pocketable. Lenses are tiny. You can handhold while still maintaining a decent amount of stabilization while you're walking around. There's no jittly, wallowy thing, that you got in full frame cameras. And this is something that I personally think that Micro Four Thirds is lacking, which they could have pushed the vlogging market, which they didn't.
Only with the pens, and that's before the tech they had was really up to it. But the other thing about depth of field is, if you're the reason most vloggers want depth of field is for focus shift between what they're showing you and their faces. And when you're that close, anything will give you a strong focus shift. That's my phone, for heaven's sake. You don't need a full frame camera for that.
No. So this is Micro Four Thirds. It does the same thing, right? So
no, but you're right. I mean, it's supposed to be about Canon, not Olympus. But if if Olympus had the market in the palm of its hands, in my opinion, and thought, oh, I don't know, no, let's stop doing it. If it just hung on, just kept the tech, maybe, if it could have stretched it to 4K 60 and with maybe 10-bit recording just to convince the techies, it'd still be there. But
well, it can be done. I mean, the GX line in Panasonic Lumix cameras are, they have 10-bit 422. They have everything you ever really need from a techie point of view. If you are, into that kind of thing, which John Allen also said, MFT camera are very good for video versus full frame. I agree. I mean, Super 35, you don't need huge sensors.
If you're not going to do much grading, 8-bit recording's fine.
Yeah, and I know it's becoming more academics, and when you start talking about numbers, but how many of us, including a lot of the solo filmmakers or a video production company who work as a one-man band, how many of you would require, the high-end look from like a proper, cinema camera that you spend 50, 60 grand?
Well, exactly. I mean, I think if you're making a video for a client and it sold them a particular kind of grading, and that's what they wanted, then you're going to have to spend a bit of time doing that. If you're shooting with multiple cameras and on multiple occasions, you're probably going to have to do a bit of grading to get them looking the same. But I do think if you're just doing minor grading for consistency, you don't really have to be shooting in C-Log or shooting in 10-bit, because 8-bit video, you wouldn't do a lot of heavy editing. You can shift the tones and colours around a bit, and it's not going to hurt it. No, absolutely. Chuck's laughing at my battery. That's from the GR. 200 shots on the charge. Who would stand for that these days? Except Sony. Rico fans. Well, sorry, they would,
So Sony RX100 series, their batteries are awful as well,
Yeah. I've got Sony A7 too. You switch it on and the battery goes down 10%. So I've got four batteries.
like you said, Sony's like the powerhouse, right? You know, power, power, power. It's just like starting up a V8 engine, Rolls Royce, right? As soon as you start the engine, you lose £5 worth of fuel.
It's a bit like that. The batteries are better now. I've got the older battery, but I've got 4 of them.
Right, one last comment here we're going to answer before
yeah.
we wrap it up then. Angela says the Canon has strong cameras with good AF for wildlife and birding. Also have good lenses for wildlife and birding. I would not disagree.
No.
But I think to me it's down to the costs.
So on the AF side, even at the lower ends of the range, like the EOS R8, the AF is better than most people I think realise, because Canon doesn't bang on about it in the same way that Sony does, but I think it's as good as, if not better. But the lenses, yes, there are some good ones, but my God, you have to spend some money if you're talking about the big primes or constant aperture long zooms. That is a lot of money. Yes, they're good, but ooh, ouch.
Absolutely. I mean, all the white lenses, you know, they are expensive. You know, if you're looking at like fixed primes that are 13 grand, 15 grand for like a 600 f4, f5 on 6. Same as Nikon, you know, like a similar thing. But I do agree that AF, and I think people hasn't given enough credit for Canon's AF system because Sony seems to be taking all the attentions away. Because Sony marketing people know how to market their AF stuff. I have to say. Product showcase mode. Yeah. There we go. Which is the same as continuous AF in any case.
Which is like ordinary focus, but that's a button.
That's a button to enable product showcase mode.
And it's background blur mode as well.
Yeah.
You know, which does
just open up the aperture.
Aperture setting. Yeah. Whatever.
There you go. But the dual pixels, you know, the Canon, you know, has come a long way since they first introduced it, and I think they are definitely one of the best AF systems out there.
The focus in the R8 is very, very good. I would trust it for video without a second thought. You can tell it to look for people if you want to, or just leave it to figure it out for itself. It always seems to get it right. Didn't yesterday. We won't talk about that, but I think it's something I did. But no, the AF is a high point.
Yeah.
Not in the RP, even if it's only 600 quid. But the R8 and anything newer, it's really, really good.
Yeah. Okay. I just want to answer the last one here because it's quite interesting. Anthony just popped up. It seems like there are very few companies that push past 45 megapixel with full frame cameras and are actually scaling back to a smaller resolution. I would say lower resolution. I think the megapixel race may have been over now, and I think people are no longer pushing past it. And to be quite honest, how many times have we discussed this? Do we need 40 megapixels?
I think we like it because everyone likes more resolution, but whether we need it is an entirely different question. But I do agree. I think it's like Sony did the A7R4 and 5. So 60 megapixels, and we all went, "Oh my word!" And then when it came to it, how useful was it? And you know, the 40 megapixels turns out everything. Maybe that's more than we need. So I think we are kind of scaling back our expectations. It's like back in the early days of digital photography, you couldn't have enough megapixels. Now we've got enough. So maybe we've hit that plateau.
I think certainly if you look at the likes of a lot of the newer, let's say trendy cameras like the ZF, ZFC, you know, like with the exception of the X100, which is a much higher resolution sensor, but a lot of the trendy cameras are now back to 24 megapixel, 26 megapixel range. You know,
I think my XT5 might have to go because I can't find any lenses that are particularly good. That resolution. It's an optical problem, I think, because on full frame that kind of resolution is okay. So the sensor's bigger, the lenses are bigger. Yeah. You're not running into the same kind of optical problems with a smaller sensor. Got a smaller lens. The optical resolution is not scalable. That's not how it works. And I think the 40 megapixel X-T5 sensor has maybe just tipped things over the edge.
Just a bit too much.
I think I'm quite serious. I might have to swap it out for an XS20 or something humbler with the older 26 megapixel sensor.
Yeah.
Because I'm a bit fed up, but I'm a bit tired of seeing
trying to find a lens that works.
Well, the thing is that what we used to is lens resolution and sensor resolution running out at about the same time.
Yeah.
When the lens resolution is running out long before the sensor resolution, it's much harder to like your lenses.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a psychological thing, I think.
It is, but then again, you know, like I always say, I don't like to use anything too high resolution anyway. And,
no, I'm heading that way. I've just got one thing, not Canon related. Wouldn't we like that in MFT?
Oh yeah.
So that's the Sigma 10 to 18. That's a constant f2.8. Now I know on MFT that's going to work out at about it's going to be like a 20 to 36. So it's not that wide, but I'd still buy it because that's a nice little,
it's a small
quite
thing.
wide zoom to have for MFT. So whoever's got friends at Sigma, can you just have a word in their ear, please? That would be a nice thing to have.
Yeah, reintroduce some lovely Sigma MFT lenses.
Well, the thing is, if Sigma can make an APS-C zoom, a constant f2.8 APS-C zoom that small, can't be hard. Can we not have something like that for MFT? But
well, the thing is, if you look at a lot of the but if you look at a lot of the Chinese lens manufacturers, they do adapt the APS-C lenses into micro four third mount. They just change the mount and work it that way. So I'm pretty sure the optic is there. It's just a matter of working out the AF and the mount.
It'd be nice as well because you'd be chopping off the worst of the lens performance around the edges too. Could be a nice little lens if they did it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I guess it's time to wrap up. I know Anthony just popped up a question that I would like to answer, but maybe we'll reserve it for next week. And it's about OM system, and I like to talk about OM system. But we already had a discussion, but that we're going to bring it into another discussion sometime. Thank you very much for joining us today. I know it's not the usual time that we have on Wednesday. It's Thursday. Everyone might be doing something else, and I know most of you already get used to us talking on Wednesday, and so it's kind of slightly hopefully you guys will be coming back and listen to our Canon talk once it's over. You can stream back at a podcast through the music app, or just watch us all back again. Next week we're going to have another camera brand that we're going to talk to you about. Most likely it's going to be either Sony or Nikon's, and depending on whether there's any new product coming out from them, I doubt it. So we're going to be either one of them. And because we did switch a little bit, because originally we were thinking about talking Sony this week, and because Canon suddenly released the R1 and R5 Mark II, I thought maybe a good time to talk about the technology, simply because I was quite keen to talk a little bit about the AI stuff that they mentioned in the marketing materials. How good it is, we don't know yet. How good the sensor is, we can't quite tell yet. So until some real-life photographers starting to make use of the cameras, until the production units are landed on consumers' hands, I think at the moment in time it's a bit of speculation, it's a bit of pinch of salt at the moment. We don't know how well they are actually working in real-life situations. So time to tell. So we shall see in the future. So thank you very much for watching and or listening. And I was very soon pretty sure. I don't know what I'm talking about now. I think it's too late. Anyway, thanks for joining us, and no doubt we're going to see each other again in our next chat. So don't forget to subscribe and follow our podcast, and we all see you all very soon. So thanks a lot, Rod, for coming in again, and I will speak to you all very soon. Bye for now. Peace.
Bye.